I was a starving beggar shivering in the rain when I found a crumpled letter in the trash. A letter that predicted I would build an empire. 20 years later, I am a billionaire, but as my world collapses in a brutal betrayal, I just discovered a second letter hidden by the woman I love. It contains a secret so dangerous it could cost us our lives tonight. Stay tuned, because you won't believe the shocking truth buried inside the billionaire's trash. The cold rain soaked through my thin jacket. I stood outside the glass doors of the skyscraper. My stomach was a hollow cavern of hunger. I held a cardboard sign that the wind tried to steal. 20 years ago, I was not a man. I was a ghost haunting the streets of this city. I remember the smell of wet asphalt and old grease. I remember the way people looked through me. I was a failure at 24. My business had collapsed into a mountain of debt. My friends had vanished like smoke in a gale. Even my own father had told me I was a disgrace. I walked toward a trash bin near the park bench. I was looking for a discarded newspaper to keep me warm. Instead, I saw a crumpled piece of cream-colored paper. It looked out of place against the filth. I picked it up with trembling, frozen fingers. It was a letter addressed to no one. The handwriting was elegant and steady. To the soul who feels they have reached the end, it began. The world sees your shadows, but I see your light. Do not let the winter of your life bury your seeds. You are meant to build cathedrals from these ruins. I felt a surge of heat in my chest that the wind could not touch. I looked up and saw a woman sitting on the far end of the bench. She was not rich. Her coat was frayed at the sleeves, but her eyes held a depth of wisdom that felt like a sanctuary. She was watching me with a gentle, knowing smile. "You found it," she whispered. Her name was Clara. She did not give me money. She gave me a reason to believe that I was not trash. We spent the next 5 years in a tiny, one-room apartment. I worked 3 jobs until my hands bled. She sat by the lamp every night, reading to me. She sacrificed her own dreams to fuel the fire in mine. When the first million came, I tried to buy her diamonds. She pushed them away and pointed to the letter. "The gold is in your heart, Elias, not on my fingers." But then, at the height of my greatest triumph, the betrayal came. My partner embezzled everything. The empire I built for her was crumbling in a single night. I sat in the dark, ready to give up. I reached for the trash bin in my office, intending to throw the old letter away. My fingers brushed against a new envelope I had never seen. The paper was crisp and smelled of the lavender Clara always wore. I pulled the letter out with a shaking hand. It was dated from the very first month we met. "Elias, if you are reading this, it means the world has tried to break you again. I knew this day would come because greatness is always tested by fire. Do not look at the empty bank accounts or the empty chairs in the boardroom. Look at the man I saw on that park bench 20 years ago. He had nothing, yet he had the strength to survive the cold." I looked at the window reflecting my tired, aging face. The betrayal of my partner, Marcus, felt like a knife in my lungs. He had been my brother in arms for a decade. He knew every secret, every vulnerability, and every dream. He had waited until the market dipped to strike. He took the patents. He took the liquid assets. He left me with the debt and the blame. I felt the familiar, suffocating grip of despair returning. The door to my office opened softly. Clara walked in, her footsteps silent on the mahogany floor. She did not look worried. She did not look like a woman who had just lost a life of luxury. She walked to the safe in the corner of the room. I had forgotten it was even there. She tapped in a code I did not recognize. The heavy steel door swung open with a low groan. Inside, there were no gold bars or stacks of cash. There was a single dusty ledger and a small USB drive. "While you were building the empire, I was watching the foundations," she said. Her voice was a calm anchor in my stormy mind. I saw the way Marcus looked at the ledgers 3 years ago. I saw the greed masquerading as ambition. So, I made a choice to protect the man, not just the company. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What is in that ledger, Clara?" I asked. She placed it on the desk between us. "The record of every honest hour you worked, and the proof of every lie Marcus ever told. I have waited for him to move his hand so we could finally win the game." But as she reached for the USB drive, her hand faltered. Her face went pale, and she leaned heavily against the desk. I lunged forward to catch her before she hit the floor. My heart felt like it was being crushed by a giant hand. "Clara!" I cried out, the name tearing from my throat. She was cold to the touch, her breathing shallow and fast. I realized then that while I was fighting the world, she was fighting a silent war. She had hidden her pain so I could focus on my purpose. The woman who saved me from the gutter was fading in my arms. I ignored the ledger and the USB drive on the desk. They were just plastic and paper compared to her life. The hospital corridors were white, sterile, and unforgiving. The machines ticked with a rhythm that mocked my panic. The doctor emerged from the room with a somber expression. "She has been pushing herself past the limit for years," he said. "Her heart is tired, Elias. It has carried too much for too long." I sat on the plastic chair, feeling smaller than I did on that park bench. I had billions in the name of the company, but I was bankrupt in spirit. I realized that success without her was just a polished grave. I stayed by her side for 3 days without sleeping. I held her hand and whispered the words of that first letter. I promised her that I would burn the empire down if it meant she would wake. On the 4th morning, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at me and did not ask about the money or the betrayal. "Did you look at the drive?" she whispered, her voice a mere thread. "I do not care about the drive, Clara," I replied through tears. "You must care," she insisted, her grip tightening on my fingers. "It is not just about the theft. It is about the children." I went back to the office while she slept under the watch of the nurses. I plugged the USB drive into my computer with a sense of dread. I expected to see bank transfers and forged signatures. Instead, I found a folder titled, "The Foundation of Truth." It contained years of secret donations Marcus had blocked. He had been redirecting the funds meant for the orphanages we supported. He was not just stealing from me, he was stealing from the helpless. The depth of his cruelty made my blood turn to ice. I scrolled further and found a video file dated 1 week ago. It was a recording of Marcus in his private study. He was talking to someone on the phone about a final move. "Once Elias is out of the way, we liquidate the assets," Marcus said. "And the woman? She is a loose end. Make sure she does not recover." The chill in my bones had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I stared at the screen as Marcus spoke those words of pure poison. He was not just a thief. He was a predator waiting for the kill. I looked at the clock on the wall and realized the gravity of the time. Clara was alone in that hospital bed, vulnerable and weak. If Marcus had a hand in her collapse, she was in immediate peril. I did not call the police. I did not call my lawyers. I ran to the elevator, my heart thundering like a war drum. I drove through the city streets like a man possessed by a ghost. Every red light felt like a lifetime of wasted seconds. I thought of the sacrifice Clara had made to keep me standing. She had absorbed the blows meant for me until her heart fractured. I reached the hospital and sprinted through the quiet lobby. The silence of the hallway felt heavy and ominous. I reached her floor and saw a man in a white lab coat standing by her door. He was not the doctor I had spoken to earlier. He held a syringe in his gloved hand, his back turned to me. I did not hesitate. I tackled him with the strength of a drowning man. We crashed into the medication cart, sending vials shattering across the tile. The man struggled, his eyes wide with a panicked, animal light. I pinned him down, my fingers digging into his shoulders. "Who sent you?" I roared, my voice echoing off the sterile walls. He stopped fighting and looked toward the shadow at the end of the hall. There, standing by the emergency exit, was Marcus. He did not look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a cornered beast, his face twisted in a sneer. "You always were too sentimental, Elias," he said calmly. "That letter you found 20 years ago, it was a curse, not a blessing. It gave you hope where you should have had common sense." He held a remote device in his hand, his thumb hovering over a button. "The hospital backup generators are rigged, my old friend. One click, and the machines keeping your precious Clara alive go dark." I looked at Clara through the glass window of her room. She was pale, her chest rising and falling in a rhythmic, mechanical hum. I looked back at Marcus, the man I had trusted with my life. The betrayal was complete. The stakes were absolute. "Why, Marcus?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, steady growl. "Because you were never meant to be a king," he hissed. "You were meant to be the trash I found on the street." He pressed the button, and the lights flickered and died. The darkness was absolute for a heartbeat, but my soul was on fire. I did not chase Marcus into the shadows of the hallway. I turned toward the woman who had given me everything. I burst into her room as the backup monitors began to wail in distress. The silence of the stopped ventilator was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. I grabbed a manual resuscitation bag and began to pump air into her lungs. "Breathe, Clara!" I commanded, my voice thick with a desperate power. "You are the architect of this life, and I will not let the walls fall." With every squeeze of my hands, I poured 20 years of gratitude into her. I remembered the hunger, the cold, and the cream-colored letter. I remembered how she saw a titan where the world saw a beggar. Suddenly, the light surged back to life with a triumphant hum. Security personnel swarmed the hallway, led by the head of hospital safety. They had intercepted the override Marcus had attempted to bypass. I saw Marcus being tackled to the ground near the exit. The digital evidence on the USB drive had already reached the authorities. Clara gasped, her eyes snapping open as the machine took over once more. She reached up and touched my face with a hand that was finally warm. "You chose right, Elias," she whispered, a tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "You chose the person over the pursuit." In that moment, the billions in my accounts felt like grains of sand. The true wealth was the rhythmic beating of her heart against mine. Marcus was led away in chains, his greed having built a prison of his own making. Years later, we sat on that same park bench where it all began. The skyscraper I built loomed in the distance, a monument to hard work. But we were not looking at the building. We were looking at the young man shivering in the corner of the park. I walked over to him and handed him a new letter. It contained no money, only the wisdom that Clara had taught me. "Hardship is not a destination. It is the soil where greatness grows," I told him. The moral of our journey was carved into the foundation of my soul. Success is not measured by the height of your climb, but by who you carry with you. A man is only as rich as the love he is willing to protect at any cost. We walked away together, hand in hand, leaving the shadows behind forever. The trash of my past had become the gold of my future. We were finally, truly, home,